Hello, welcome to episode 6.
Thanks. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Carrington, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm
Good.
good. How are you, Erin?
I'm great. I'm excited today to talk about the biggest making piece with Plan B of your wedding reception or wedding outdoor activities. I guess
Wedding weekend.
is that the
Let's make
title?
peace with it.
Yeah.
Namaste.
Namaste. So I think at this point, the planners and us need to take a deep breath.
Mhm.
And if you're planning anything with an outdoor ceremony or an outdoor reception or an outdoor cocktail hour, also take a minute and take a deep breath because we are going to walk you through how to plan for Plan B.
Yep.
And Plan B in our mind can happen in many different situations, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Plan B has happened with a tornado, with a hurricane, many hurricanes, with torrential downpouring, with the skies opening up 5 minutes before your guests arrive on the shuttles.
Yep.
So what we thought would be helpful is when you are planning a wedding with an outdoor ceremony or a tented wedding or a reception, we need to really have a solid plan B in place so that you know what the plan is far in advance and that we're not troubleshooting the week of the wedding, God forbid, or really, God forbid, the day of the wedding, right? As planners.
And again, as the title indicates, you've made peace with it.
So
it's not a struggle in your heart or your mind the week of the wedding. We know what it is, and here's when we have to make the decision, and we're okay with doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just the nature. It's just the risk of doing an outdoor anything. We love outdoor celebrations. They're beautiful. There's no comparison. It's just very different things, but going into it, you just have to understand that there are variables that come with it. And outside of my very trusty burying the bourbon, which I highly recommend.
Yes. Will you explain burying the bourbon?
If you're not from the South, you don't know. You're like, what, Carrington? And I'm just going to briefly go into this because it's very important in your Plan B that you bury the bourbon, and you're supposed to do it 1 month out in advance from your wedding day. And you're supposed to do it in the same spot that you're getting married, but you can, I feel like there's some wiggle room to do it in the same town or same vicinity.
Or go in the middle of the night and bury the bourbon on the property of your venue. And don't tell us about it.
Don't tell me. You have to bury it upside down. It's important. And what you do is you bury it a month before. It keeps the rain away. And now I preface this by saying it may not keep the rain away for your full day. It will keep the rain away for your exact ceremony time. And I stand by it. I'm knocking on wood though.
Okay. I, as the official owner of the business, would like to put out a disclaimer that Carrington is neither a soothsayer, a fortune teller, or an attorney. So
I will say that it increases your chances.
It does.
It increases your chances.
So she cannot officially back this up, but as a percentage for us as planners, what is your percentage of burying the bourbon?
Very high. It's very high. In fact, I think it's 95%.
I'm at 100.
Again by saying
100% for my
wedding. It might be 100. I just don't want to say 100 because then
I'm knocking on wood right now too.
Yeah.
For everyone listening.
But I do recommend it.
100%.
But don't unbury it until after your ceremony. Like I had my couple last week and was like, oh, we're gonna dig it up tonight. And this was Friday after the rehearsal dinner. I'm like, no, stop.
No.
Dig it up after you're married and you drink straight from the bottle.
Yeah.
I'm telling you guys. I'm telling you.
It works. I totally agree with Carrington.
It does.
And anyway, we've often said so many times, if we had like a crystal ball or if we had a way to guarantee that weather was going to be fine, that we would, number one, we would probably not be working.
Retired.
Yeah. We'd be like on an island somewhere with like frozen cocktails in our hand right now, but we'd probably still be doing this podcast because it is pretty fun because we do love weddings, but it is the one thing that I personally think actually works. And I'm superstitious, so I knock on wood all the time, but
Aaron's very
I
superstitious.
am.
That's the one thing that I am superstitious about, burying the
Yeah,
bourbon. So
it is. I
anyway,
think, and it's also fun. It's just like a
it is fun.
fun,
It's a fun
yeah.
thing for y'all to do. It's a fun thing to like tell your friends about that you're doing, that your kooky wedding planner told you to do. Um, but I love it, and I love sharing it with my couples, especially if they first look at me and they're like, "Heh."
Yeah.
But I stand by it. You can ask any of my past clients that have done it; they
Mhm.
stand by it. Um, but anyway, if you don't trust that 100%, which I'm gonna say, we
If that's not your
as
plan B,
professionals, I cannot tell you not to have a plan B because you've buried the bourbon, but it just increases your chances.
it
We
does.
want you to again come to peace with plan B. So when you've chosen your venue, and if you've chosen for that for ceremony or cocktail hour to be outside, or even dinner for that matter, what are your backup options?
Mhm.
So does it mean that you're moving in, if you're at a hotel and you're getting married in the courtyard, does that mean that there's a ballroom space that you're moving into? If you're getting married and it's your dad's backyard, and we're getting married or we're having the reception in the tent, are we putting up another tent for your ceremony? Or are we moving into the larger tent? So these are all questions that you've got to map out much far in advance, so that not only you know the costs that are going to be associated with those decisions, but you know when you're going to have to make the decision and what is involved in the decision. So do we want to start with what do we want to start with?
So I want to back up first. If you are in the deciding point right now where you're trying to decide whether or not you'll have an outdoor component as the couple getting married, I want you to stop for a second and really think about, are you a flexible person?
Yeah. Yep.
Are you somebody
True.
that the day before your wedding or the morning of your wedding, because sometimes it rolls out of nowhere, especially in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like in Florida or all those, like
Summer.
sometimes,
Summer.
right? And so you want to make sure that you're okay with plan B, and you're okay with like thinking of a plan B. And then before, I'm not saying before you sign any contracts, you have to have everything planned out, but you need to have a kind of an idea, right?
Yeah, for sure. Because
So
it
if
may be something, if you don't talk about it and you don't know what the backup plan is, it may be, I think we touched on this on the last episode, on episode 5, when we are talking about choosing your venue. It may be a terrible option. It literally may, or it
it
may
might
be
be a
something
ballroom
you
with like
just
a
don't
big,
love.
ugly air wall.
Right.
Like,
And
yeah,
and that's a stark contrast from the beautiful garden that you're envisioning in your head. So that's hard to reconcile for some people. So it may be worth, and I think what Erin was leading into, if you're not a flexible person, or if you are envisioning that and you think, if I have to move out of the garden, it's going to literally ruin my day, then maybe you talk about choosing the indoor space, but investing in ways to make it feel like your own, or to
totally.
transform it into a way that you're comfortable with or that you're excited about, versus literally just saying, I'm going to hold out hope that it's not going to rain. It's not going to rain. And then we get to Friday and it's 90%. And I say to you, I'm so sorry. We've got to make this decision. And my professional recommendation is that we have to go to plan B, and you're literally destroyed by it. And
Right.
that also makes me really sad, because I don't want to do that to you.
No,
But
totally.
it's just the nature of it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think having an outdoor ceremony or a cocktail hour, all of those things. And I think cocktail hour isn't the most important, right? Like I think
Right.
it's, I think it's fun to have an outdoor cocktail
Mhm.
hour, but I think if you have to move your cocktail hour, the chance of you and that you as a couple being there is pretty low anyways. And we can discuss that at a later date.
Yeah.
We don't recommend our couples go to cocktail hour. I'm a
Right.
big cocktail hour fan. Like I love the fun drinks, the fun food. I love the social aspect of everything. But I think as a couple, it's hard for you to even get through the sea of people. But so I think that's fun. But I think it's really, like Carrington was saying, it's a ceremony thing, really, and also your reception. Now, let's talk about the ceremony part of it too, because I think that's important. I think the one thing that I think, Carrington, you brought up earlier before we got on this call or this podcast, when we were talking about this topic, was musicians. Like, will they play? Will your ceremony musicians play if it's drizzling? Most won't. Most will literally get up and walk away.
Yeah, they will not. And they will fight you over it, not physically, but they will tell you absolutely no, because and I understand that. And they're not doing it to break your heart or to destroy your wedding. They're doing it because their instruments are expensive, and
that's their livelihood. That's
that's their livelihood. And if they bend once, they bend every time, and they can't do that. And so they're not doing it to be mean or difficult. That they just have to. So that's
absolutely.
Make sure if you're willing to, get married when it's drizzling, which we've had some couples that are, and it's beautiful. Make sure that there is a covered space for your musicians, or your, maybe you don't have music. I don't know. I've never done that before, but
either.
Guess you could.
Awkward.
Yeah. But make sure that you're accounting for your musicians.
Totally.
Making that decision.
I think that's a really good point, one that I didn't even think about bringing up. And I also want to talk about, so when you're coming up with plan B, so let's use the example of an outdoor ceremony with a space that has no indoor backup. So let's talk about that first, because I think there's two things. One is the outdoor ceremony with no indoor backup. The second is an outdoor ceremony with an indoor option, but you might not like it. So we'll talk about, how you set up for the design of transferring both as well, because I think that's important. But so I think number one is, if you're doing an outdoor ceremony and you don't have a backup option, we have to plan for a tent, no matter what. And when we say that, I think it's important to remember that now, if cost is an issue, which most people, it's an issue when it comes to their wedding, putting up a tent for a ceremony doesn't have to break the bank. It really doesn't, right? Like, I think if it's just a regular tent that we put up and it's, normal frame tent, simple, easy tent. Now, sometimes those aren't really pretty. Sometimes the pole goes right behind where you and your fiance want to stand for the ceremony. I want you to think
it's right in the middle of the aisle.
Oh God. Yeah, there's that too. Not that she's talking from past traumatic experiences, but
I need to take it down.
So you guys, if you're listening to the podcast, Carrington's face has fallen and her eyes look stressed.
No. I negotiated to get that pole out of the aisle, because we can't have that.
Yeah. I mean, and so we want to think of these things. So I want you to, again, I really think it's important when you're listening to these podcasts to either, if you're listening it and driving, come back and listen to it, stop what you're doing, pause and write these notes down, because I want you to the rental company, where are the poles in the tent?
Yeah.
Again, I think I'm going to say this at every single podcast episode. You're learning from our mistakes.
Right.
From the things that we're like, what? Why would you put a pole there? We didn't even think. And so I think we've been doing this, like the business 14 years, right? Like 500 plus weddings. Like we've learned a lot over the years. So I think it's important. Make sure you find out where the poles are. Then I want you to ask them, like, what does the tent look like? Do the poles have barrels behind them? Like, all of that stuff.
How is it installed? And when does it have to be installed? Because that's another thing that you're going to have to, two things on that with the tent and with your venue. In any scenario outside, you need to know when that decision has to be made. And in some cases, it's a couple days in advance.
Yeah.
Which is hard to make that decision, because you're like, well, it might change. But it's sometimes better that way, because then you can accept it and move on. Or if it's something where your venue allows you to make a day of decision, what time does that decision have to be made? And if you are bringing in a tent, it's definitely going to have to be a couple days in advance, because they have to staff, they have to have the manpower to put up the tent, the time to put up the tent. And that's not something, it's not a tailgate tent where you pop it up
No.
a few minutes before. So just understand with your rental company and with your venue the time parameters that are going to
Mhm.
come along with that decision.
Absolutely. And I think again, and it's also like, do you want to drape the tent? Like Carrington just did a beautiful home wedding and they had beautiful draping in the tent. And for the ceremony, like there's things that we want to make sure that it doesn't look like an afterthought.
Right,
Although
right,
sometimes our couples don't care and they're like, just put the tent up. It's basically an umbrella, right?
right.
So I think that's really important. So find out from your rental company when you need to make the tent decision if that's your backup option. Usually it's like Wednesday or Thursday the week
Yep,
of. It's
yep.
if that tent is loaded on the truck, you're probably going to pay for the
You're
full
going to
tent.
pay for it. Yeah.
Um, but we've had a lot of clients that end up just saying like on Friday, don't put the tent up, but
Yeah.
fine, we'll pay
We're
for
okay
it.
with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not talking $10,000. A tent can be like $1,500 to 2,000.
15 to 3,500. And I
Mhm.
feel like
Depend.
prices have gone up this year.
Yeah, I guess I should
Folks.
back up by it's probably gonna be
Yeah.
2,500. Yeah, they have
Yeah.
gone up.
Prices like, and this is a whole nother, I think this is a whole nother topic for another podcast. 2021 has brought significant price increase
Huge. Yeah.
in this market, and it's sad. And there's a lot of contributing factors, but I digress. It definitely, the cost has, so I would say 2,500 is probably a good tool for measurement when you're thinking about just a basic tent.
Basic.
And of
Yes.
course there's things that go in that affect that one way or
Mhm.
another, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's important to plan for that budgeting. Like I think so for all of our couples when we're talking about, and again, I'm not talking about a cocktail hour. You can, if you want to have that plan, we can talk, we would price that out for our couples and we do a lot of the time. But I think for most couples, cocktail hour, we just figure out, does it go under
Yeah.
the main tent or whatever?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I want you to budget for it so that
Mhm.
it's not, again, our goal is that you're not surprised by any
Yeah.
costs, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So that's ceremony with a tent option. And then the other option, before I move on, I do want to say, like, if your wedding is in the most popular wedding months of your market, you really want to get that tent, on hold, just on hold 3 to 6 months out.
Yeah.
Because maybe even more, because some tents, some companies, some markets just don't have the inventory or the manpower. And we know right
Right.
now staffing is a huge issue. So,
Yeah.
maybe, do you think about that right now?
Yeah. And you're to hold that, you're going to be putting down a 50% deposit. And that's just something, if you're getting married outside, that's just something you have to accept.
Yeah.
If you have your backup plan is to have a tent, you're going to have to pay that 50%, whether you use it or not. And again, like Erin said, if it's loaded on the truck, you're going to pay the other 50%.
Yeah,
And that's just
absolutely.
something that I feel you have to just hit head on and understand, so that that's not another thing that's again like socking you in the face the
I
week of the
also,
wedding.
yeah. And I also think when costs start creeping up, people tend to go, oh, they're taking advantage of us because it says wedding.
Right, right.
That doesn't
And
happen.
that's not the
Doesn't
case.
happen. That is a
It's
myth.
again, it's a business, it's people's livelihood.
Yeah.
There is manpower and physical labor and logistics involved in it.
And
And that's where the cost comes from.
if we were doing a corporate event, that tent would cost us the same thing. So
Yeah.
I always
Yeah.
remind people that I think that's like a myth that has gone around and I hate it,
Yeah.
because we work with some really good, honest people and they're not trying to
Yeah.
gouge you. It's just the cost of doing the
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
So that's the tent option. The other ballroom option is a little easier. It's or a much simpler
Mhm.
plan, but I want you to, when you're touring your venue or you've already booked it, go see the space,
Yep.
particularly when you start going in the design stage of it.
Yep.
I want you to think about where the ceremony takes place in the room, in the ballroom. Is it, again, like I said, is it in front of an air wall? So we want to
Mhm.
pipe and drape it. Can we turn the ceremony a different way? Can you work with your florist and rental company to design it so that it really feels intentional and not just
Yes.
we picked it up and moved it from
Yeah.
outside?
And it structurally that it is something that can change from one space to
Mhm.
the other.
Yeah.
Um, because it's not always that case. Like if you've planned this big, gorgeous arbor, it probably weighs a lot and you're probably not going to bring it inside.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind too, that you're designing it in a way that can be fluid in both scenarios.
I think that's a really good word, fluid. I think any outdoor component of a wedding, it needs it needs to be fluid.
Yeah.
You need to be flexible.
Yeah.
So Carrington, when we were thinking about this topic, I had a moment of like flashback of, so I'll tell a story because I'm probably going to tell a story every podcast because that's what I do. But we have lots of them. So we were doing a wedding and it was a beautiful home wedding. And we had a huge ceremony tent. And we also had a beautiful ceremony location outdoors that the family had put a ton of work in. They've built this amazing, beautiful bridge. And we got this massive, and it was the most beautiful home. The wedding ended up being absolutely spectacular.
Everyone was on an island.
Yeah. I mean, it was insane. It was so beautiful. We loved it all, but we had this massive tent that never got used. It never got filled and it never got used. But the point of this story is I think you need to have, and I'll tell you why I'm telling you this. So we walked into, it was at their home. So Carrington and I walked into the parents' bedroom where everyone was hanging out. And we said to them, okay, we're all looking. I mean, we had our phones, the radar was up, everything, we had every app open to see where the storm was coming. Cause it wasn't 100 people. It was like,
it was 300
people. And so we walked into the bedroom. I'll never forget. We looked at the parents and we said, guys, this is the rain forecast. It looks like it's coming through. The dad said to us, looked us dead in the face and said, this wedding is happening on the island outside, not under the tent. The mom looked at us dead in the face and said, my guests will not get rained on. And then they both left the room. Do you remember it? Like,
I remember it like it was yesterday.
He was sitting there putting
literally turned each other like,
and we didn't know what to do. No. We sat there, jaws open, just like, oh my gosh, what do we do? So the point of this story, and I will tell you, it ended up being a beautiful day.
It was beautiful.
We had it outside. No, it didn't rain at all, did it?
They buried the bourbon.
There you go. You're right, they did. Is that you need to have somebody that's the point person, one person that's going to make that call. And the reason why I want you to have that is it might be you. So you might be a couple, or you might be the bride that's like, oh, I'd make that. I'm fine making that decision, but I'm going to be the person. Or you might be the person. So like, if I were getting married, I mean now, but like when I got married, my older sister was my point person. I put her, she was the one that was going to make the decision if the bar should be extended, anything, because I trusted her implicitly. She has great judgment. She has great taste. So do you have someone, and it's not your wedding planner. It is never going to be your wedding planner that makes that decision.
No.
Because we cannot make that decision for you. We'll give you the pros and cons of both, but that's such a personal decision. So having somebody that's the main deciding person, I think is really important. And we have that person, you should think of that person anyways for your whole wedding day, right? So like, just in case anything goes wrong, you don't need to be involved with it. So, so having someone that makes that decision on the day of, but I thought that story was important. One, because I mean, I'll never forget. I mean, they both were so set and they couldn't have been on further sides of that argument. So, but it ended up being beautiful. And it was one of the most beautiful weddings I think we've ever done. And
and the weather was perfect.
Oh my gosh. And all the
we've had that happen so many times. As far as, the weather does come through, but it clears up. And I think that's one of the things that you have to be clear about in advance. Like in some scenarios, like when you're doing a private home tinted wedding, maybe there's a little bit more flexibility as long as you have a team of people that are willing to jump in at the last second.
Absolutely.
But at venues, it's not going to be as flexible because they have to follow protocol for liability reasons. There's multiple reasons why they have to follow certain protocol. So, understanding the level and depth of flexibility up front and not expecting flexibility at the last second. Again, coming back to the point that we've talked about a couple times, your venue coordinator is not telling you no to be mean to you.
Mhm.
Um, they're they have to work within parameters.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. So
Mhm.
again, your wedding venue vendors, when it comes to rain or it comes to flexibility and plan B, they're not trying to sabotage you. They have your best interest at heart, but they also understand where they have to draw the line in order to make it safe for your guests, to make it safe for you. To make it safe for their staff. So there's a lot of things that come into play there, and I think that also brings another point in my mind. When you're making the decision, think about your guests too, because you are hosting them, you are inviting them to this event. You don't want them to be miserable. You may be okay with being out in the rain and it drizzling, but your friends may not be. And they love you and they don't want to ruin your day either. But do keep your guests in mind when you're making the decision, and if they're going to be comfortable, or if it's so muggy that they literally have bugs sticking to their face. Like, be courteous and be thoughtful when you're making the decision as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really very good way to end the podcast. I think
Be
um
nice.
be nice and remember that you are hosting this event. So it's, yes, it's your day, absolutely, and you're going to have an amazing time, but these people are also coming to celebrate with you, and their
Yep.
comfort needs to be thought of first,
Yep.
because nobody will remember how great your food was or how beautiful your ceremony was if they're covered in like chiggers or
Yeah. That's a story for another
story for
day.
another day.
That's a story but yes, keep it in mind, because that they will remember being uncomfortable. If your guests are uncomfortable at any point of your wedding day, that's what they're going to take away from it. And that's one of our goals always. And this is a good way to end it. We want your experience and your guest experience from start to finish on your wedding day to be seamless and to be
Yeah.
easy. And that allows it to be joyful and happy. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking through it and when you're coming to peace with plan B.
Couldn't said it better myself. With that, we thank you for listening. We would love if you subscribed and reviewed us. And you can always visit us, our YouTube channel. It's the Virtual Wedding Planner. And then our website, you can go there and download our 5 questions to ask each other. It's virtualwedplanner.com. So thanks so much. And we'll see you next time.
Come back for a new story.
So many. We have so many. All right. Bye.